Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off. This is part 2 of our landmark Supreme Court cases. So our next case is Tinker versus Des Moines, Iowa, 1969. And this is a case that happens in a school. Students were wearing black armbands to school in protest of the Vietnam War. The school tells them they have to take them off, that they're breaking dress code. The students and their families sue, claiming it's against their First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court rules in favor of the students and saying that the armbands are protected and that students do not lose their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech when they step onto school property. So this upheld the idea of freedom of speech on a school campus. Next up we have Reed versus Reed, 1971, and this case is about women's rights. And what had happened is that a divorced couple loses their son, and they are arguing over who should be the administrator of his estate, take care of his will and all that stuff. Idaho, the state, claimed that in estate matters like this, men outranked women. Sally Reed sues her ex-husband because of this. The court says that the laws that discriminate against women are unconstitutional, such as this one. And that's due to the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. The woman you see in the picture is actually current Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She, at the time in 1971, is the lawyer who argues the case for Sally Reed in front of the court. Okay, up next we have probably the most controversial case in Supreme Court history, and that is Roe v. Wade, 1973. This is the Supreme Court case that upheld a woman's right to have an abortion as a right to privacy protected by the 14th Amendment. This Supreme Court precedent has been challenged numerous times and will continue to be challenged in the future. Up next we have the U.S. versus Nixon. This is 1974. What had happened is that 7 of Richard Nixon's aides had been arrested for breaking and entering. They had been caught breaking into some offices in the Watergate building that belonged to the Democratic Party. And when the prosecution is going after these 7 aides, they subpoena, they require that these audio tapes that the president had made in the Oval Office be turned over to be used as evidence against the 7 people charged. Nixon claims that he doesn't have to turn them over, that they are protected by executive privilege. And it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules that he had to turn them over and states that executive privilege is all about protecting national security, that there were no military or diplomatic secrets on these tapes. He was trying to cover up a crime. And as a result, they were not protected by executive privilege. Next, we have another high school court case, and this is Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer. And what happens in this case is that there's students who are creating a school newspaper, and the principal pulls 2 of the articles from the newspaper claiming they're inappropriate. The students sue, saying that their First Amendment's freedom of the press, freedom of speech, were being violated. The court, however, rules with the school and says that the articles are not protected. Their idea is based on the fact that the paper represents the views of the school, not the individual students. It's the school's name that is going on the headline of the paper. And because it is a school newspaper, the principal has control of what the content of that paper is going to be. Because it's not an individual's paper, it is the school's. Okay, up next we have the U.S. versus Eichmann, and this is 1990. In 1989, Congress passed a law that would protect the American flag from being destroyed. It was called the Flag Protection Act. Eichmann, though, burns an American flag on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building as a way to protest government policy. And of course, he's arrested for breaking this law. it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court shoots down the Flag Protection Act. It says that burning the flag in protest is freedom of expression and protected by the First Amendment. Okay, 2000, Bush versus Gore. This case put America on the hot seat, and had the whole country looking our way. In the 2000 election, we have George W. Bush taking on Al Gore, who had been Bill Clinton's vice president. And the election is really, really close. You can see in the photo we have the actual numbers count there. Here in Florida, it's basically a tie, and they want to do a recount because there was issues with some of the voting machines. They weren't working properly, and some votes weren't counted because of it. So the Florida Supreme Court ordered a hand recount for the entire state. But Bush takes it to the Supreme Court trying to stop the recount. He thinks if it's going to be recounted, he's going to end up losing the entire election for the whole country. The Supreme Court rules in Bush's favor and stops the recount. What they say is that Florida did not have a set standard between the counties. Some counties used different machines. Some counties counted things that if it looked a little wanky, it would count, while a different county would disqualify that ballot. So because there wasn't a set standard, what the Supreme Court said is if they did a recount now, and they set a single standard, that they would be creating a new election law after the election. So kind of like a ex post facto law, in a way. So that is why they put a halt to the recount. As a result, George W. Bush becomes president. Okay, up next we have Roper versus Simmons, 2005. In this case, Simmons is going to be arrested and sentenced to death. He's given the death penalty, and the issue is that he's only 17 when this happens. So the question for the court is executing a minor, somebody who's under the age of 18, considered cruel and unusual punishment? What the court rules is that yes, it is unconstitutional to execute a minor. You know what I mean? That their age plays into their lack of ability to know right from wrong. So they constitute it as cruel and unusual punishment, and it's no longer allowed. Okay, up next we have a really complicated case, and that's Hamdan versus Rumsfeld. This is 2006. And this is all about our war on terror. And what do we do with people who are accused of being terrorists? So this man Hamdan was Osama bin Laden's former chauffeur. Of course, hopefully you remember that Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks. So his driver is actually captured by Afghani forces in Afghanistan. But we take him into custody and we lock him up in Guantanamo Bay, which is a military base in Cuba. Well, when he gets there, he tries to sue for habeas corpus. He wants to go to trial in the United States and wants to know what he's being charged with. He's claiming that he has rights spelled out in a time of war, what are called the Geneva Convention. And basically, they're the rules of warfare. He's claiming that those were violated, and that if the U.S. government tries him not in a court but with a military tribunal, that is against the Geneva Conventions. Well, the Supreme Court steps in on this case. It's taken to them. And the Supreme Court rules that, yes, the methods that our government was using under the Bush administration were not in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. And the Geneva Conventions being set up globally as basically the rule book for warfare for the whole planet outweighed the military tribunals that our government wanted to set up and wanted to prosecute this man with. One of the big things about these tribunals was that the people that were accused were not really allowed to know the evidence against them. It was said that the evidence was, top secret classified military secrets. But, you know what I mean, according to the Geneva Conventions and according to our own Constitution, you know what I mean, we have ideas of rights of the accused and that you should know what evidence somebody has against you. So that was the big problem with this case. Okay, last one, folks. This is Obergefell versus Hodges. And again, this is several cases being grouped together to form one Supreme Court case. In this case, we have many different groups of same-sex couples who are suing several states for the right to marry, claiming that their 14th Amendment rights are violated. 14th Amendment, of course, is equal protection under the law. In this case, the court ruled that they do have the right to marry, that the right to marry was a basic liberty that is protected for everybody under the 14th Amendment. So as a result, it legalized same-sex marriage in all the states across the country. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks.